The security guard's eyes avoided mine as he escorted me through the hallway I'd walked confidently for 3 years. My cardboard box of personal belongings felt heavier with each step, the contents rattling like broken dreams. Behind me, I could hear the whispered conversations of my former colleagues, their voices a mixture of shock and relief that it wasn't them being marched out of Pinnacle Solutions like a common criminal. My name is Jessica Morgan, and this is the story of how the worst day of my professional life became the catalyst for everything I never knew I wanted. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I sat in my car in the parking garage, staring at the building that had consumed my 20s. At 28, I thought I had it all figured out. Marketing manager at a prestigious consulting firm, corner office with a view of the city, salary that let me afford my downtown apartment and designer handbags. I was living the dream, or so I thought. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was being fired for performance issues when I'd single-handedly landed the Morrison account just 6 months prior. But corporate politics is a game I never learned to play. And my direct approach had apparently ruffled too many feathers. David Harrison, my supervisor, had smiled his practiced corporate smile as he delivered the news, citing restructuring and new directions, while avoiding the real reason we both knew hung in the air between us. I'd caught him taking credit for my Morrison presentation. When I'd confronted him privately, professionally, he'd promised to set the record straight. Instead, he'd spent the next 3 months systematically undermining my projects, questioning my decisions in meetings, and planting seeds of doubt about my capabilities with upper management. The final nail in the coffin came when the Morrison client specifically requested to work with me on their next campaign. And David had to explain that the real architect of their successful launch was actually him. The security guard cleared his throat, and I realized I'd been sitting in my car for 20 minutes, still gripping the steering wheel. I drove home in a daze, my mind cycling through the events of the morning like a broken record. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a growing anger that burned in my chest like acid reflux. My apartment felt different when I walked in at 11 on a Tuesday morning. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional siren. I set the cardboard box on my kitchen counter and stared at its contents. A coffee mug with the company logo. A small succulent that had somehow survived 3 years under fluorescent lighting. A photo of my college friends, and a stack of industry magazines I'd never had time to read. The first few days were a blur of disbelief and rage. I found myself composing angry emails to David that I'd never send, imagining confrontations where I'd tell him exactly what I thought of his backstabbing tactics. I scrolled through job boards mechanically, my heart not really in it. Everything looked the same. Corporate positions requiring corporate souls, where politics mattered more than performance. It was during one of these mindless scrolling sessions that I stumbled across an article about a woman who'd started her own consulting firm after being wrongfully terminated. She'd built it from the ground up, focusing on ethical business practices and employee empowerment. The article mentioned that she'd started by helping other professionals who'd been victims of workplace politics and discrimination. Something clicked. I'd always been good at seeing through corporate nonsense, at identifying the real issues beneath the polished presentations and buzzword-heavy memos. What if that wasn't a liability? What if it was exactly what people needed? I spent the next week researching, diving deep into employment law, workplace culture consulting, and small business development. I reached out to former colleagues who'd left Pinnacle Solutions under similar circumstances. The stories I heard were both heartbreaking and infuriating. There was Marcus, a brilliant analyst who'd been pushed out for refusing to manipulate data to support a client's predetermined conclusions. There was Amy, a project manager who'd been labeled difficult for insisting on realistic timelines and adequate resources. The more I learned, the more I realized that David Harrison wasn't unique. He was a symptom of a system that rewarded political maneuvering over actual competence, that valued conformity over innovation, that treated employees as disposable resources rather than human beings with families and dreams. But instead of just being angry about it, I decided to do something about it. I used my severance package to hire a lawyer and file a formal complaint against David and Pinnacle Solutions. Not because I wanted my job back, but because I wanted to establish a paper trail. I documented everything: the stolen credit, the systematic undermining, the witnesses who'd seen it happen but had been too scared to speak up. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Kim, was impressed by my thorough documentation and told me I had a solid case. While the legal process crawled forward, I started building my own consulting practice. I called it Integrity Solutions. And my focus was simple: helping companies build cultures where merit mattered more than politics, where employees were valued for their contributions rather than their ability to play corporate games. My first client was a small tech startup whose founder had heard about my situation through a mutual connection. They were growing rapidly and wanted to avoid the toxic dynamics they'd witnessed at larger companies. I helped them establish clear communication protocols, transparent performance metrics, and conflict resolution procedures that actually worked. The work was challenging in ways I'd never experienced at Pinnacle Solutions. Instead of creating glossy presentations to hide problems, I was identifying root causes and developing real solutions. Instead of managing up to protect my own position, I was focused entirely on delivering value to my clients. Word spread quickly in the business community. There's apparently a significant appetite for consultants who prioritize substance over style, who can cut through corporate BS to get to the heart of organizational issues. Within 6 months, I had more work than I could handle on my own. That's when I reached out to Marcus and Amy, along with several other talented professionals who'd been casualties of corporate politics. We formed a network of independent consultants, each bringing our own expertise and perspective, united by a shared commitment to ethical business practices. The irony was delicious. Many of our clients were companies that wanted to avoid the exact problems that places like Pinnacle Solutions created. We were helping organizations build the kinds of cultures that would have prevented people like David Harrison from thriving. But the real revenge came 18 months after my termination, when Patricia called with news about my case. Pinnacle Solutions had agreed to a settlement that included a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a commitment to implement new policies around performance evaluation and credit attribution. More importantly, the investigation had revealed a pattern of similar behavior by David Harrison, spanning several years. He was terminated for cause, losing his severance package and facing potential legal action from other former employees who'd been inspired by my case to come forward. The company also agreed to provide positive references for all employees who'd been terminated under his supervision, effectively clearing our professional records. But by then, I didn't need their reference. Integrity Solutions had grown into a thriving practice with a waiting list of clients. We'd helped dozens of companies create healthier workplace cultures, and I'd found more professional satisfaction than I'd ever experienced in corporate life. The financial success was gratifying, but it wasn't the most important part. I was doing work that mattered, with people I respected, for clients who valued what we brought to the table. I traded the golden handcuffs of corporate employment for the freedom to choose my own projects and the satisfaction of building something meaningful. The real transformation, though, was personal. Getting fired had forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about the path I'd been on. I'd been so focused on climbing the corporate ladder that I'd never stopped to ask whether it was leaning against the right wall. I'd been measuring success by external metrics, salary and title and corner office, rather than by how I felt about my work and its impact on the world. The forced pause had given me space to rediscover what actually motivated me. It wasn't the promise of promotion or the security of a steady paycheck. It was the challenge of solving complex problems, the satisfaction of helping people, and the freedom to do work that aligned with my values. I started speaking at industry conferences about toxic workplace cultures and the hidden costs of corporate politics. I wrote articles about the importance of ethical leadership and the business case for treating employees with dignity and respect. I became an advocate for professionals who found themselves in situations similar to mine. The speaking and writing led to opportunities I never could have imagined in my old corporate role. I was invited to join advisory boards, to consult with executive teams, to help shape organizational policies at a strategic level. I was having influence and impact that went far beyond what I could have achieved as a marketing manager at Pinnacle Solutions. My personal life transformed as well. The stress and long hours of corporate life had left little time for relationships or hobbies. I'd been too tired most evenings to do anything but collapse on my couch with takeout and Netflix. My friendships had suffered, and I'd been single for longer than I cared to admit. But with the flexibility of running my own practice, I could structure my days around my priorities. I joined a hiking group and rediscovered my love of being outdoors. I started taking photography classes and found a creative outlet I'd been missing. I made time for the relationships that mattered, and I even started dating again. The man I'm seeing now, Alex, is a social worker who shares my values about making a positive impact. We met at a volunteer event, and our first conversation was about work-life balance and finding meaning in our careers. He's never known the corporate version of me, the one who was stressed and exhausted and defining herself by her job title. He knows the person I became after I was forced to rebuild my life from scratch. Looking back, I can see how much I'd been compromising without even realizing it. I'd been playing a role, performing a version of professionalism that required me to swallow my integrity and smile while doing it. I'd been so focused on fitting in that I'd lost track of who I actually was. The termination had been devastating at the time, but it had also been liberating. It had freed me from the expectations and constraints of corporate life, from the need to please people who didn't share my values, from the pressure to succeed in a system that was fundamentally broken. I'm not naive about the challenges of entrepreneurship. There are days when I miss the predictability of a steady paycheck, when the responsibility of running a business feels overwhelming, when I wonder if I'm making the right choices. But even on the difficult days, I know I'm doing work that matters, and that knowledge sustains me in ways that corporate success never could. The biggest surprise has been discovering how many other people are hungry for alternatives to traditional corporate culture. The professionals I work with, the clients I serve, the audiences I speak to, they're all looking for ways to build careers that align with their values, to create organizations that prioritize people over profit, to find meaning and fulfillment in their work. My story isn't unique. There are countless professionals who've been marginalized, overlooked, or pushed out of toxic workplace cultures. There are talented people who've been labeled as difficult or not a culture fit because they refuse to compromise their integrity or because they threaten the status quo. But there's also a growing movement of people who are choosing different paths, who are building businesses and organizations that reflect their values, who are proving that you don't have to sacrifice your soul to succeed professionally. The revenge I thought I wanted was personal, a way to get back at David Harrison for what he'd done to me. But the revenge I actually got was much more satisfying. I built something better than what I'd lost. I created a career that fulfilled me in ways my corporate job never could. I found my voice and my purpose, and I used them to help others do the same. When I run into former colleagues from Pinnacle Solutions now, they often comment on how different I seem, how much happier and more confident I appear. They're right, I am different. Getting fired forced me to confront who I was when I stripped away all the external trappings of success. It forced me to rebuild my professional identity from the ground up, based on my own values and priorities rather than someone else's expectations. The woman who was escorted out of that building 2 years ago was accomplished but hollow, successful but unfulfilled, climbing a ladder that led nowhere she actually wanted to go. The woman I am now is still climbing, but I'm building my own ladder, and I know exactly where it leads. I often wonder what would have happened if I'd never been fired, if I'd continued climbing the corporate ladder at Pinnacle Solutions, if I'd never been forced to confront the disconnect between my values and my career. I probably would have made senior manager eventually, maybe even director. I would have had a bigger office, a higher salary, more prestige. But I also would have been miserable. I would have spent my career compromising my integrity, playing political games, and measuring my worth by metrics that didn't actually matter. I would have been successful by conventional standards but empty by the standards that actually count. Instead, I get to wake up every morning excited about the work I'm doing. I get to help companies build cultures where talented people can thrive, where merit matters more than politics, where employees are valued and respected. I get to work with clients who share my values, with colleagues who challenge and inspire me, on projects that make a real difference in people's lives. The financial success has been gratifying, but it's not what drives me. I'm driven by the knowledge that I'm using my skills and experience to create positive change, to help build a business world that works better for everyone, not just the people who are good at playing corporate games. I'm driven by the messages I receive from people who've read my articles or heard my speeches, who tell me that my story gave them the courage to leave toxic situations or to start their own businesses. I'm driven by the clients who tell me that our work together has transformed their organizational culture and improved their employees' lives. The ultimate revenge against David Harrison and people like him isn't personal, it's professional. It's proving that there's a better way to do business, a way that prioritizes integrity over politics, substance over style, people over profit. It's building organizations that would never tolerate the kind of behavior that thrives in toxic corporate cultures. Every successful project is a small victory against the system that produced David Harrison. Every client who chooses to work with us instead of a traditional consulting firm is a vote for a different kind of business world. Every professional who decides to leave a toxic situation and build something better is a step toward the kind of change I'm working to create. The journey from fired to fulfilling hasn't been easy, but it's been worth every challenge, every sleepless night, every moment of uncertainty. I've learned that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you professionally is actually the best thing that can happen to you personally. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to discover what you actually need. If you're reading this and you're stuck in a situation that's compromising your integrity, that's asking you to be someone you're not, that's making you miserable despite external success, I want you to know that there are alternatives. You don't have to accept that this is just how business works. You don't have to sacrifice your values for your career. It might require courage to make a change. It might require risk and uncertainty and hard work. But it's possible to build a career that aligns with your values, to do work that matters, to find fulfillment and success on your own terms. The question isn't whether you can afford to make a change. The question is whether you can afford not to. Life is too short to spend it playing political games, compromising your integrity, or building someone else's dream while neglecting your own. My unexpected path to happiness started with being fired, but it was really about being freed. Freed from expectations that didn't serve me, from a system that didn't value what I had to offer, from a career that was making me successful but not happy. The revenge I got was better than anything I could have planned. It wasn't about getting back at David Harrison, though his comeuppance was satisfying. It was about getting back to myself, to the person I was before I learned to compromise and conform and play corporate games. It was about building something better, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong in traditional corporate culture. Everyone who's ever been told they're too direct or too idealistic or too concerned with doing the right thing. The best revenge is living well. And I'm living better than I ever imagined possible. I'm doing work that matters, with people I respect, for clients who value what I bring to the table. I'm building a career that aligns with my values, a business that makes a positive impact, a life that brings me joy and fulfillment. That's the story of how getting fired became the best thing that ever happened to me. It's the story of how a devastating setback became the catalyst for everything I never knew I wanted. It's the story of how sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself, and it's just the beginning.